Welcome everyone, my name is Max Maass and I will be presenting the paper Snail Mail Beats Email Any Day on effective operator security notifications on the Internet. This paper was authored by myself, Marc Clement and Matthias Hollick. Let us imagine for a moment that you are a security researcher and you have just found a new security issue on the Internet. It might be a vulnerability, it might be an information leak, but whatever it is, you have wrote some software that detects it, and you have found that it is very widespread. There are thousands, maybe tens of thousands of websites that are affected by it. And now you're wondering, how can I reach the operators of these websites to make sure that they remediate the issue and the Internet becomes a bit safer? This is the situation that we were in 2018. We are part of the team operating privacyscore.org, which is a website scanning service that checks for security and privacy issues on websites. And one of the things we are checking for is the presence of information leaks. So these are files that are made available that should not be, because they contain internal information about the server or, in the worst case, maybe even entire database backups. And given this dataset, we wanted to make sure that these people get a chance to remediate, and we took a look at the literature on security notifications. So there have been a number of papers in this area that have investigated how to best notify people about issues. And they have looked at different aspects of this problem. For example, who should you send the message to? Is it better to send it directly to the operator of the affected system, or should you send it to the hosting company or maybe the network provider? Who should be sending the message? Should you just send it as an academic research group, or is it better to work with a large company like Google? Or maybe it doesn't make a difference. What level of detail should you be using? Should you send a highly detailed message that is very long? Should you send a very short message that does not contain all the information but maybe a link to a full report? This and many other questions have been investigated, and we wanted to contribute to this knowledge in two areas. First of all, we wanted to take a look at the effect of including a description of how the data might be used by an attacker. So this is an aspect of the level of detail, and generally prior work has shown that using a higher level of detail will increase the remediation rate. So this is our expectation here. Secondly, we want to take a look at the message medium. Pretty much all prior studies used emails to contact the recipients. There was only one study that considered alternative contact channels like letters and phone calls. And they only did it on a very small subset of their full data set that also had some self-selection biases built in and so on. And on that data set, they found that alternative channels are no more effective than just sending emails to automatically collected email addresses. And this seemed intuitively wrong to us. So we wanted to build a study around this question to get some better evidence here. Now, the fact that we are sending letters also means that we have to limit ourselves to our own country, Germany, for two reasons. First of all, international postage is fairly expensive. And second of all, a letter has, of course, a certain time that it takes to arrive at a recipient, unlike an email. And a domestic letter, there you can be fairly sure that it will take 1 to 2 days to arrive. On an international letter, you don't know if it will be 5 days or 3 weeks. And since most notification studies are interested in finding out how long it takes from the recipient receiving the notification to the point where they fix the issue, this is a problem if you send international letters. So we decided to limit ourselves to German websites for the purpose of this study. We got our dataset from two sources. First of all, we used all the data already collected by PrivacyScore, and we also used data collected from the German Wikipedia using the Wikidata website, where we wrote a query that would download all websites that are referenced in the Wikipedia and wrote them into a file for us. We then filtered both of these datasets based on the .de top-level domain and then checked the common paths for information leaks using technology derived from the privacy score stack. And here we look for a total of 5 different vulnerability types. The first is PHP info files, which contain information about the configuration of the PHP installation. The second is server status and server info pages, which contain internal information about the state of Apache or Nginx. We also look for version control system files like Git or SVN, which might allow an attacker to download a copy of the source code of the website. And then we also look for very high severity issues like database backups that are publicly available or cryptographic keys. We also use deduplication based on 2 different areas. First of all, we look at the leaks themselves to see if there are some that are probably related, for example, because they share the same Git commit hash, or maybe they have identical software versions for all installed libraries. And in these cases, when we were fairly sure that they were operated by the same people, we would merge these records. We would also merge records of websites that had the same contact address. Given the fact that we are using letters, we had to manually collect address information for the simple reason that there is no whois equivalent for postal mail. And we took this opportunity to then also deduplicate based on these addresses so that each recipient would only receive a single notification and all their websites would be assigned to the same group. This has 2 reasons. First of all, we don't want a single operator to receive more than 1 message, potentially even from different experimental groups. This would skew the results. And secondly, we don't want one operator that controls 20 websites to have 20 times the impact of an operator that only controls a single website. So this is also a way to attempt to lead to a level playing field between the different operators. So our study uses letters and emails, as I discussed, and the 2 different levels of detail, where we have the baseline message that just says, we have found that this file is available, it is dangerous to expose these files, please fix it. Or in the case of the more detailed attack scenario message, we would also say an attacker might be able to use this in the following way to compromise your website. Of course, there's also a control group that was not notified at all. And this is just to see how a website behaves completely without outside intervention. All notifications also contained a link to a self-service tool that allowed the recipients to check if their website was still affected or if the problem had been resolved. We sent the initial notifications in June 2018, collected data for 1 month, and then sent a debriefing in July. And in this case, we also notified the control group to also give them an opportunity to remediate the issue. A quick word on our methodology for the evaluation. We use a technique called bootstrapping, which relies on repeatedly sampling the data set to derive basically confidence intervals for the resulting statistics. If you're interested, the details are in the paper, but this is why the following plots have small confidence intervals. So we can see that letters are much more effective than emails. So letters are at around 60% remediation rate, whereas emails are closer to 40%, and then the control group that did not receive any notification is closer to 5%. So we can see that any kind of notification is always better than no notification, but letters are much better than emails. For the level of detail, we have slightly surprising results. Because from the prior work we would have assumed the attack scenarios to improve the remediation rate. However, the opposite seems to be the case. The attack scenarios in green here have a lower overall performance than the baseline messages in blue. To look at this in more detail, we split it up to all 4 combinations of medium and level of detail, and here we can see that for emails, there's basically no difference between the 2 levels of detail, whereas for letters there is. We can see that the attack scenario degraded the performance compared to the baseline message. Now, as I said in the beginning, we have 5 different vulnerability types, and one of them is the largest by far. and that is the group of PHP info files. And this is also the group that leads to the graphs looking like this, because if we only look at that group, we can see that by the end of the study, the remediation rates for the email with the 2 levels of detail are pretty much equivalent, whereas for letters it is much better in the baseline message than with the attack scenarios here. The other vulnerabilities have the expected trends where the remediation rates improve with the attack scenario. Now, where does this discrepancy come from? We don't really have a good explanation. The best theory we could come up with is based on the fact of how we collected our address information. So recall that we manually collect information. And during the address collection, we looked for 2 different types of contacts. We would look for a technical contact, and if no technical contact exists, we would use the general purpose contact if it was given, and if none of them was given, we excluded the website from the study. Now, for letters, we can be fairly certain that the amount of technical specific contacts that had a specific postal address just for technical inquiries is pretty much 0, and that pretty much all letters will have reached a general purpose contact simply because it is extremely rare that the website lists a specific postal address for technical issues. For emails, it is much more common to have a specific email address listed for technical inquiries. So we would assume that more emails reach technical contacts directly and not via a general purpose contact. In this case, it might be that a general purpose contact and a technical contact have different behavior and thus react differently to the different levels of detail that we provide in the messages. However, when we were collecting the address information, we actually did not record if we were collecting a technical or a general purpose contact for a specific website. So we don't have a labeled dataset of websites with the type of contact that we used. And this means that we cannot try to validate this theory here. Additionally, even if this was the case, it is still surprising that the behavior would be different for the PHP info group, but not for all the other groups. So in the end, we see that methodological lesson learned, always label your data. And also, we don't really know what is going on here. In conclusion, we can say that letters increase remediation compared to email. If they are cost effective, of course, depends on how urgently you want people to fix an issue, and also what your budget is, of course. It might also be possible to use letters as a follow-up mechanism after an email has failed. This is something that we did not evaluate, but it might be a way to save some money if you are set on sending letters. We also found the results for the level of detail to be inconsistent, and we are not sure where this is coming from, this inconsistency. What we can say is that more detailed messages, at least the way we use more detailed messages, will not always be superior to less detailed messages, although it was for most groups that we used. It was just the PHP info groups where we saw different results. So in general, I would probably still recommend writing more detailed messages, but it is interesting that it is not universal here. Before concluding, I would like to draw your attention to 2 further papers, which I am also a co-author on. The first is another notification study that we published at this year's Usenix Security Conference. And in this study, we, in addition to replicating the results on letters and emails, also looked at the effect of different senders and did another interesting thing where we would try to frame a technical issue as a legal issue and see if this would be effective. We also have a survey of the recipients and an analysis of the received responses to our emails and letters. So if you like notification studies, check this one out. I think it's pretty interesting. And if you want to conduct your own notification studies, we have also written a paper on the best practices for notification studies, so that you don't make the same mistakes that we did in our studies. And if you're interested in that, you can find it at the IWSMR workshop here at ARES, where it will be presented on Friday at 11 a.m. And you can find the full papers at the links and QR codes given on this slide. With that, I would like to thank you for your attention. You can find the paper and dataset at the URL given here, and I'm looking forward to your questions. Have a nice conference.